A broke janitor, ridiculed for inheriting a worthless desert shack, ignored the laughter until a government agent knocked on his door with a life-changing offer. What happened next? This is a story about hidden fortunes, second chances, and proving everyone wrong. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what happens next. The last laugh. The desert sun hung heavy over the town of Red Creek, Arizona, a place where hope withered faster than the sparse shrubs clinging to the cracked earth. Carlos Mendez wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, the rough fabric of his janitor's uniform scratching against his skin. The high school hallway echoed with the squeak of his mop bucket as he pushed it forward, the scent of bleach and stale teenage rebellion lingering in the air. "Hey, Mendez!" A voice boomed behind him, laced with mockery. Carlos turned to see Dave Kowalski, the football coach and resident loudmouth, leaning against a locker with a smirk. "Heard you finally got that inheritance, huh? A real palace out in the sand." A few passing teachers chuckled. Carlos forced a tight smile. News traveled fast in a town like this, especially when it was something to laugh about. "Yeah," Carlos said, keeping his voice even. "Guess Uncle Tony wanted me to have a vacation home." That earned another round of laughter. His uncle, Antonio Tony Mendez, had been a town eccentric, a grizzled old man who lived in a shack 40 miles outside of Red Creek, muttering about the land knowing things. When he died, the only thing he left Carlos was that sun-baked ruin and a stack of unpaid property taxes. No one had envied him the inheritance. Carlos pushed the mop harder, the rhythmic slosh of water filling the silence. He was used to being invisible, just a janitor, the guy who cleaned up after everyone else. At 52, he had long accepted that life wasn't a change for him. He worked, he paid his bills, and he went home to a tiny apartment that smelled like old coffee. That was it. But then, the letter from the county assessor's office arrived. The shack was worse than he remembered. Carlos stood in front of the crumbling structure, the wooden planks warped from decades of relentless heat. The roof sagged like a tired sigh, and the front door hung crooked on its hinges. A faded "no trespassing" sign, half buried in the sand, was the only indication that anyone had ever cared about the place. He sighed and stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. Dust swirled in the thin shaft of light, cutting through the broken shutters. The air smelled like dry rot and memories. Uncle Tony hadn't been much for furniture, just a rusted stove, a cot with a sun-bleached blanket, and stacks upon stacks of old newspapers and geology magazines. Carlos kicked at a pile, sending a cloud of sand into the air. "What was your plan, old man?" he muttered. Then he saw it, a manila envelope, tucked beneath a rusted toolbox. Inside were maps hand-drawn, with strange markings and notes in his uncle's cramped handwriting. Circles around certain patches of land. Numbers. Words like sample density and lithium trace. Carlos frowned. What the hell was this? The knock came 3 days later. Carlos had just gotten home from work, his muscles aching from hauling trash bins all day, when a sharp rap at his apartment door startled him. He opened it to find a woman in a crisp suit standing there, her dark hair pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail. A badge hung from her lanyard. "Carlos Mendez?" she asked. "Yeah. I'm Dr. Leasing Gwynn with the Arizona Geological Survey." She held out a business card. "We need to talk about your property." Carlos stared at her. "What about it?" She hesitated, then said the words that would change everything. "Mr. Mendez, we have reason to believe your land contains one of the largest untapped lithium deposits in the state." The world tilted. "And if that's true," she continued, "it could be worth a fortune." The secret in the sand. Carlos stared at Dr. Nguyen, his grip tightening on the doorframe. The words "worth a fortune" bounced around his skull, but they didn't quite stick. Nothing in his life had ever been worth more than a few $100. His beat-up truck, his second-hand TV, the meager savings account that barely covered emergencies. "Come again," he said, his voice rough. Dr. Nguyen glanced down the apartment hallway, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Mind if I come in? This isn't the kind of conversation we should have in the open." Carlos stepped aside, his mind racing. The apartment was small, just a worn-out couch, a coffee table stacked with overdue bills, and a kitchenette that hadn't been updated since the 80s. He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, her posture stiff with professional urgency. "Your uncle's land," she began, pulling a folded map from her briefcase, "is situated in a zone we've been surveying for critical minerals, specifically lithium." She spread the map across the coffee table, pointing to a red-circled area. "This is your property. Initial core samples suggest a high concentration beneath the surface." Carlos squinted at the lines and symbols. "So, what does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Nguyen said slowly, "that if these findings hold up, mining companies would pay millions for the rights to extract it." The number should have sent him reeling. Instead, a sharp laugh escaped him. "You're telling me that shack sitting on a pile of sand is actually sitting on a gold mine?" "Not gold," she corrected. "Lithium. It's used in batteries, phones, electric cars, renewable energy storage. Demand is skyrocketing." Carlos sank onto the couch, the weight of it pressing down on him. His uncle, the crazy old hermit, had known. Those maps, those notes. He'd been tracking it for years. A knock at the door shattered the silence. Carlos frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. Dr. Nguyen tensed. "Are you—" Before she could finish, the door swung open. A man in a tailored suit stood in the doorway, his polished shoes gleaming under the dim apartment light. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Carlos Mendez?" the man said, stepping inside without an invitation. "I'm Robert Vance with Granite Ridge Mining. I hear you're the man of the hour." Carlos shot to his feet. "Who let you in?" Vance ignored him, his gaze flicking to Dr. Nguyen. "Ah, the state beat me here. How predictable." He turned back to Carlos, pulling a checkbook from his jacket. "Let's cut to the chase. We'd like to make you an offer for your land. $500,000. Cash. Today." The number hung in the air. $500,000. More money than Carlos had ever dreamed of holding. Dr. Nguyen stepped forward. "Mr. Mendez, I strongly advise you not to sign anything until you've had independent legal counsel. The actual value of that land could be significantly higher." Vance's smile didn't waver. "Or," he said smoothly, "it could be worth nothing. These surveys can be unreliable. Take the money, Mr. Mendez. It's a sure thing." Carlos looked between them, the scientist with her maps and warnings, and the slick businessman with his checkbook and easy promises. His pulse pounded in his ears. Then, from the hallway, came another voice. "Carlos, you in there?" His brother, Marco, leaned into the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "What the hell's going on?" Vance's grin widened. "Ah, family. Perfect." He extended a hand to Marco. "Robert Vance. We were just discussing your brother's windfall." Marco's expression darkened. "Our windfall," he corrected, shooting Carlos a look. "Uncle Tony was my family, too." Dr. Nguyen crossed her arms. "Mr. Mendez, this is exactly why you need time to—" Vance cut her off. "Time is money, sweetheart." He slid the check across the table toward Carlos. $500,000. Right now. Or walk away and risk getting nothing. The room fell silent. Carlos stared at the check. It was more than enough to pay off his debts, to finally breathe easy. But something in Vance's eyes, the hunger, the calculation, made his stomach twist. He picked up the check, then slowly tore it in half. Vance's smile vanished. "Big mistake, Mendez." Marco swore under his breath. "You idiot! That was our money." Carlos met Vance's glare. "If my land's so worthless, why are you so desperate to buy it?" For the first time, Vance hesitated. Dr. Nguyen stepped closer. "Because he knows what it's really worth." Vance straightened his tie, his voice dropping to a growl. "This isn't over." With that, he turned and strode out, Marco hot on his heels, already yelling about lawyers. The door slammed shut. Carlos exhaled, his hands shaking. Dr. Nguyen studied him. "You just made a powerful enemy." "Yeah," Carlos muttered, "but I think I just found out what my uncle was trying to tell me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded map from the shack, the one covered in his uncle's scribbled notes. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, was a single line. Don't let them steal it. Enemies emerge. The night after Robert Vance stormed out his apartment, Carlos couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old building made him tense. His mind replaying the man's threat. This isn't over. He rolled onto his side, staring at the cracked ceiling, the weight of the last 24 hours pressing down on him like a physical thing. By morning, the news had already spread. Red Creek was a small town, the kind where secrets died young and gossip moved fast. Carlos realized just how fast when he pulled into the high school parking lot and found a cluster of teachers huddled near the entrance, their conversation cutting off the second he stepped out of his truck. Eyes followed him as he walked inside, whispers slithering in his wake. That's him. Heard it's millions. Always knew Tony was hiding something. Carlos kept his head down, gripping his mop bucket like an anchor. Then Dave Kowalski, the football coach, clapped him on the back hard enough to make him stumble. Well, look who's the richest janitor in Arizona. His grin was wide, but his eyes were sharp. Guess you'll be quitting any day now, huh? Carlos forced a shrug. Still gotta eat. Dave laughed, but it sounded hollow. Yeah. Say, you remember my kid's got that knee surgery coming up? Medical bills are killing me. Maybe once your money clears, we could talk about a little loan. Carlos. The sharp voice cut through the hallway. Principal Hendricks stood outside her office, arms crossed. My office. Now. The whispers surged again. Principal Hendricks shut the door behind them, her expression unreadable. Carlos braced himself for another demand, another favor from someone who'd never given him the time of day before today. Instead, she slid an envelope across the desk. Your paycheck, she said. Early. Carlos frowned. Why? She hesitated, then sighed. Because I've had 3 calls this morning. Reporters, lawyers, some guy from Phoenix claiming to be your long-lost cousin. Her mouth twisted. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Thought you might want a head start. Carlos pocketed the envelope, unease curling in his gut. Thanks. She studied him for a long moment. For what it's worth, I hope it's true. You deserve a break. It was the first time in 10 years she'd spoken to him like he was a person. The diner was packed when Carlos stopped for coffee on his way home. The usual crowd of ranchers and truckers replaced by unfamiliar faces in suits. One of them, a woman with a sleek ponytail and a tablet, zeroed in on him the second he walked in. Mr. Mendez. Sylvia Pierce, Arizona Daily Star. Any comment on the lithium deposit? Carlos sidestepped her, heading for the counter. No comment. A man in a BOLO tie swiveled on his stool. Come on, son. Whole town's talking. You're gonna hog all that money or spread the love. The diner fell quiet, waiting. Carlos set his coffee down, his pulse loud in his ears. It's not even real yet. BOLO tie snorted. That's not what your brother's saying. Carlos froze. What? Marco was in here an hour ago, the waitress muttered as she refilled his cup, telling everyone how his uncle left him half that land, and how you're trying to screw him over. The coffee turned to acid in Carlos's throat. Marco's truck wasn't at his trailer when Carlos pulled up, but the door was unlocked. Typical Marco, never worried about thieves because he'd never had anything worth stealing. Until now, the place was a mess. Beer cans and takeout containers covering the counter. Carlos stepped over a pile of laundry, heading for the small desk in the corner. If Marco was making claims, he'd have paperwork, or at least a plan. The drawer stuck when he yanked it open. Inside, beneath a stack of unpaid bills, was a folded legal document. Carlos's stomach dropped as he scanned the words. Petition for probate, in the matter of the estate of Antonio Mendez. Marco was contesting the will. A floorboard creaked behind him. Carlos spun, but not fast enough. Marco stood in the doorway, his face flushed, a bottle dangling from his fingers. Well, he slurred. Look who's snooping. Carlos held up the papers. What the hell is this? What's it look like? Marco took a swig, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. I'm taking what's mine. Uncle Tony left it to me. Yeah. Marco's smile was ugly. And why is that? Huh? Because you visited him twice a year out of guilt? Because you're the good son. He stepped closer, the stink of whiskey rolling off him. That land's family land. And I'm family. Carlos shoved the papers back in the drawer. You're drunk. Damn right I am. Marco's voice rose. You think I'm going to let you walk away with millions while I rot in this shithole? You blow in a week. Marco's fist came out of nowhere. The punch caught Carlos in the jaw, sending him crashing into the desk. Pain exploded across his face, bright and hot. He tasted blood. Marco loomed over him, breathing hard. Should have taken the money, brother. Carlos spat red onto the floor. Get out of my way. Marco hesitated, then stepped aside, his bravado fading as Carlos shouldered past him. The last thing Carlos heard as he slammed the door was Marco's voice, quieter now. You're going to regret this. That night, Carlos lay awake again, his jaw throbbing. The shack's keys sat on his nightstand, next to Uncle Tony's map. At 2:17 a.m., his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You should have sold. Then, a second later, sleep tight. Carlos was out of bed in an instant, peering through the blinds. The parking lot was empty, but his truck's windshield was shattered, and spray painted across the hood in jagged red letters. Mine. The fight begins. The acrid smell of spray paint still hung in the air as Carlos stood over his ruined truck, fists clenched. The word mine glared up at him in jagged crimson letters, the broken glass glittering under the dim parking lot lights like scattered diamonds. Someone wanted to send a message, and they made sure he received it loud and clear. His phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another threat. Next time it won't be the truck. Carlos deleted the message, his jaw set. He'd spent his whole life keeping his head down, swallowing insults, letting the world walk over him. But this was different. The police station was empty except for a tired-looking deputy, nursing a cup of coffee. He barely glanced up when Carlos walked in. Vandalism report, Carlos said, sliding his phone across the counter with a photo of the truck. The deputy sighed, flipping open a notepad. You pissed someone off, Mendez? Carlos stared at him. You tell me. Whole town seems to know my business before I do. The deputy's pen paused. Look, I'll file the report. But between you and me, he leaned in, lowering his voice. You might want to get yourself a lawyer. Fast. Rebecca Cole's office was in a brick building that had seen better decades. The plaque on the door read Cole & Associates, mineral rights, land disputes, eminent domain, and beneath it, in smaller letters, no case too small, no bully too big. Carlos liked her immediately. She was in her 40s, with sharp green eyes and a handshake that could crack walnuts. Her desk was buried under stacks of files, a half-eaten sandwich balanced precariously on top of a law book. Granite Ridge Mining, she said as soon as he mentioned Vance's name. They're vultures. Last year, they paid a widow in Benson $50,000 for a copper claim worth $20 million. She took a savage bite of her sandwich. We sued. She got 12. Carlos sat forward. Can you help me? Rebecca wiped mustard off her chin with the back of her hand. Oh, we're going to do more than help. We're going to bury them. She flipped open a file, revealing a photo of Robert Vance shaking hands with a county commissioner. See this guy? He's got 3 pending bribery investigations, and your brother's probate claim. She snorted, flimsier than my ex-husband's alibi. Carlos exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. What do we do first? Rebecca grinned. We hit back. The notice came by courier the next morning. Granite Ridge Mining versus Carlos Mendez. Injunction requested. Immediate cease of all land activities. They're claiming you lack clear title because of Marco's probate case, Rebecca explained over the phone. Standard stall tactic. They want to tie you up in court until you're desperate enough to take their chump change. Carlos crumpled the paper in his fist. So now what? Now, Rebecca said, we introduced them to Arizona. Revised statutes 33 to 218. The courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the back wall. their cameras clicking as Carlos walked in. Marco sat near the front, flanked by a slick-haired lawyer who kept adjusting his cufflinks. Robert Vance lounged in the aisle seat, smirking like he'd already won. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair and a voice like a shotgun, squinted at Vance's lawyer. Your alleged defendant's ownership is in dispute based on the probate filing, Your Honor, the lawyer said smoothly. Until that's resolved. Rebecca stood. Your Honor, if I may. She didn't wait for permission. 33 to 218 Argentine pesos clearly states that a probate claim without documented prior interest doesn't constitute a title cloud. Mr. Vance knows this. He's just wasting the court's time. The judge's eyebrows climbed. Counselor? Vance's lawyer flushed. We. Furthermore, Rebecca continued, pulling a document from her briefcase, I have here a sworn affidavit from the county clerk confirming Mr. Mendez's deed was properly recorded in 1998. And this, she slapped down another paper, is a cease and desist order for the harassment my clients endured, including vandalism and threats tied directly to Granite Ridge employees. Carlos's head snapped up. What? Vance shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is out of line. The judge peered over her glasses. Seems to me you're the one playing fast and loose, Mr. Vance. She banged her gavel. Injunction denied. Mr. Mendez retains full rights. And Mr. Vance? She fixed him with a glare. One more stunt like this, and I'll hold you in contempt. The reporters erupted. Marco's lawyer started whispering frantically in his ear. And Vance looked at Carlos with pure, unfiltered hate. Back at Rebecca's office, Carlos finally asked a question burning in his gut. Those threats, you really tied them to Granite Ridge? Rebecca spun her laptop around. Security footage showed two men in Granite Ridge uniforms keying his truck. Recognize them? Carlos's blood ran cold. The taller one was the same guy who'd been lurking outside the diner. The other, Marco's buddy, works at the auto shop. Rebecca snapped the laptop shut. We've got them by the short hairs, Carlos. Now we squeeze. That night, Carlos drove to the shack for the first time since this began. The desert air was cool, the stars brighter out here than anywhere in town. He walked the property lines with Uncle Tony's map, tracing the old man's notes with his fingertips. Near a cluster of mesquite trees, his boot kicked something metal. He bent down, brushing away the dirt. A rusted sample case. Inside were rock cores labeled in his uncle's handwriting, each dated and numbered. At the bottom lay a notebook. Carlos flipped it open to the last entry. They're coming for it, but it belongs to the boy. Tell him. The page ended mid-sentence. Carlos looked up at the endless stretch of land around him, suddenly understanding. This wasn't just dirt and minerals. It was a war, and Uncle Tony had known it would be his to fight. Power shift. The morning after the court victory, Carlos walked into the Red Creek diner and felt the air change. Conversation stuttered to a halt. Heads turned. The same people who'd mocked him for years. The ranchers who called him Tony's loser nephew. The teachers who'd acted like he was part of school's furniture. Now watched him with something new in their eyes. Respect. Or maybe just greed. Sheriff Dawson, who'd never so much as waved at Carlos in a decade, stood up from his usual booth and extended a hand. Mendez, heard about your win. Always knew Vance was a snake. Carlos ignored the handshake. You could have mentioned that before he vandalized my truck. The sheriff's smile faltered. Behind the counter, Doris the waitress slid a coffee toward Carlos. No charge, for the first time in his life. On his way out, the mayor himself intercepted him at the door. Carlos, just a man I wanted to see. Mayor Pritchett's grip was too tight, his smile too wide. The town council's having a special meeting tonight. We'd love your input on economic development opportunities. Carlos extracted his hand. You mean my money? Pritchett's laugh was nervous. Now, this is about community. Rebecca nearly spat out her soda when he told her, they want you to invest? After treating you like dirt? She tossed the mayor's fancy invitation into the trash. Tell them to pound sand. Carlos picked the card back up, studying the golden boss seal. What if I went? Rebecca paused. Why? Because for once, Carlos said quietly, I want to see their faces when I'm the one with power. The town hall was packed. Carlos recognized half the crowd, small business owners, the school superintendent, even Dave Kowalski slouched in the back row. The murmurs started the second he walked in. Mayor Pritchett practically tripped over himself to usher Carlos to the front. Everyone, please welcome our guest of honor. Carlos didn't sit. He stood at the podium, letting the silence stretch until the room grew uneasy. You all know me, he began. The janitor, the guy who empties your trash cans and mops up your spills. The nobody who inherited a worthless patch of desert. He pulled Uncle Tony's map from his jacket, unfolding it with deliberate slowness. Turns out it wasn't so worthless after all. A nervous chuckle rippled through the crowd. Superintendent Graves cleared his throat. Carlos, we're hoping you might consider donating to the school's new STEM wing. Think of the children. The same children, Carlos said, who call me trash man for 10 years? Dave Kowalski stood, face red. Listen, Mendez, we get it. You hit the jackpot. But this town made you who you are. Carlos laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Yeah, it made me invisible. He turned to the mayor. You want my money? Here's my offer. Not a cent until the high school gives its custodians health insurance. Until the diner pays Doris more than minimum wage. Until this town stops treating working people like they're disposable. The room erupted. Pritchett banged his gavel. Now, Carlos, let's be reasonable. I am. Carlos leaned into the microphone. You taught me how the world works. Money talks. Well, he dropped a single lithium core sample onto the podium with a thud. Now I got the loudest voice in the room. Marco was waiting outside, leaning against his dented pickup. Real nice show in there, he sneered. St. Carlos, sticking it to the man. Carlos kept walking. I'm done with this. Marco grabbed his arm. Not, yet you're not. He shoved a newspaper at Carlos, a week-old Arizona business journal, with Vance's face on the cover. The headline, Granite Ridge Eyes Redcrete, from Megaplant. Carlos scanned the article, his stomach dropping. Proposed facility would create 1,200 jobs, conditional on land acquisition. Marco's grin was vicious. They don't need your permission if the town votes to seize the land through eminent domain. And guess who's suddenly best friends with every council member? Carlos looked back at the town hall, where Pritchett was huddled with the superintendent and Sheriff Dawson. Their eyes flicked toward him. Marco lit a cigarette. Should have taken Vance's money when you had the chance. That night, Carlos spread Uncle Tony's notes across his kitchen table. The old man had known this would happen. Known the town would turn on him. Known the wolves would circle. His phone buzzed. Rebecca, pack a bag. We're going to Phoenix tomorrow. Time to fight fire with fire. Carlos stared at the message, then out the window at the distant glow of the Granite Ridge corporate office on the horizon. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't just about money. It was about who got to decide what and who was valuable. And Carlos intended to rewrite the rules. Family betrayal. The desert highway stretched endlessly before them, the rising sun painting the asphalt in hues of molten gold. Rebecca gripped the steering wheel of her battered SUV, her jaw set tight. Beside her, Carlos stared at the blur of cacti and scrub brush, the weight of Marco's revelation pressing against his ribs like a physical thing. Eminent domain. The words tasted bitter. They could take his land, the town, the state. They could just decide it wasn't his anymore. Rebecca broke the silence. We're not letting that happen. Carlos rubbed his temples. You heard Marco. The whole town's on Vance's side now, which is why we're going over their heads. She jerked her chin toward the back seat, where a thick folder bulged with documents. I pulled every dirty deal Granite Ridge has ever made. Tax evasion in Nevada, bribes in New Mexico. And in 2019, they got caught falsifying environmental reports. Paid a fine so small it was basically a parking ticket. Carlos flipped through the pages. The scale of Vance's operation sinking in. This isn't just about my land, is it? Rebecca's knuckles whiten on the wheel. It's about how guys like him always win. But not this time. The Arizona state capitol loomed ahead, its copper dome gleaming like a warning. Rebecca parked illegally, slapping a legal business placard on the dash. Follow my lead, and let me do the talking. Inside, the air smelled of polished marble and ambition. Lobbyists in $1,000 suits clustered in hush groups, while aides scurried like ants. Rebecca marched past them all, straight to a door marked Senator Lucia Ramirez, Chair, Natural Resources Committee. The senator looked up from her desk, her sharp eyes flicking from Rebecca to Carlos. Cole, I figured you'd show up eventually. Rebecca dropped the folder in front of her. Granite Ridge is trying to steal my client's land, and they're using taxpayer money to do it. Ramirez didn't touch the file. I'm aware of the Red Creek situation. Then you're aware Vance donated $50,000 to your re-election campaign last year. Rebecca shot back. The senator's expression hardened. Careful, counselor. Carlos stepped forward. My uncle left me that land. It's all I have. For the first time, Ramirez hesitated. She studied Carlos, his callous hands, his worn boots, then sighed. Even if I wanted to help, eminent domain is a local issue. The state can't intervene unless. Her gaze dropped to the folder. Unless there's evidence of corruption. Rebecca smiled. Funny you should mention that. The press conference exploded like a grenade. By noon, Senator Ramirez stood at a podium, flanked by Carlos and Rebecca, announcing an investigation into Granite Ridge's predatory practices. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing. Is it true the company threatened Mr. Mendez? What about the alleged bribes? Carlos kept his mouth shut, his pulse roaring in his ears. This wasn't just about saving his land anymore. It was about exposing the whole rotten system. Then, from the back of the room, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. You lying son of a bitch. Marco. He shoved his way forward, his face flushed with rage. You're really going to stand there and act like you're some hero while you steal what's mine? The cameras swung toward him. Rebecca moved to block him, but Carlos stopped her. Let him talk. Marco jabbed a finger at Carlos. Our uncle was sick, demented. He didn't know what he was signing. That land belongs to both of us. Carlos reached into his pocket and pulled out the notebook he'd found in the desert. He flipped to the last page and read aloud. They're coming for it, but it belongs to the boy. Tell him. He looked up, meeting Marco's glare. He meant me, Marco. And you know why? Because you only ever visited when you wanted money. The room fell silent. Marco's fists clenched. For a heartbeat, Carlos thought he might swing. Then his brother did something worse. He laughed. You're right, Marco spat. Uncle Tony always liked you better. But guess what? The law doesn't care about that. He turned to the cameras, playing to crowd, and the law says I get half. The drive back to Red Creek was tense. Rebecca scrolled through her phone, muttering about legal precedents. Carlos stared out the window, Marco's words echoing in his skull. Half. Even if he won, even if he stopped Vance, half that money would vanish into Marco's pockets, and straight to the casinos and bars. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. Check your email. Carlos frowned, opening the message. It was a scanned document, a faded, handwritten dated years before Uncle Tony's death. The ink was smudged, the signature shaky, but the words were clear. I, Antonio Mendez, being of sound mind, leave my entire estate to my nephew Carlos, as Marco has proven himself unworthy. Attached was a note. Tony gave this to me for safekeeping. Knew Marco would try something. Doris. Carlos's breath caught. Doris, the diner waitress who'd serve him coffee for a decade without ever saying much. Rebecca snatched the phone, her eyes widening. Holy shit, this changes everything. Carlos looked back toward Phoenix, the pieces falling into place. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time, he wasn't fighting alone. The offer, The desert wind howled around the shack as Carlos knelt beside the rusted lockbox he dragged out from under the floorboards. Dust coated his hands as he pried it open, revealing stacks of yellow papers. Uncle Tony's life's work. Core samples wrapped in wax paper. Land surveys with frantic annotations. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope addressed to him in shaky script. His fingers trembled as he tore it open. Carlito, if you're reading this, they came for it. The lithium. The future. I knew they would. That's why I left it to you. Not Marco, not the government. You, because you'll do what's right, not what's easy. Don't let them take it. Don't let them lie. The land knows the truth. Tio Tony. A rock settled in Carlos's throat. The old man had seen this coming decades ago. His phone buzzed. Rebecca, State just called. They want to make a deal. Get here now. The governor's office was colder than Carlos expected. All glass and steel, with a view of Phoenix that made Red Creek look like a speck on a map. A balding man in a suit too expensive for the desert extended a hand. Mitchell Price, Chief of Staff. His grip was dry, his smile practiced. We've been following your situation, Mr. Mendez. The state would like to make you an offer. Rebecca crossed her arms. Let's hear it. Price slid a document across the table. Carlos's eyes skipped over the legalese to the number at the bottom. $110 million. His vision blurred. The zeros kept going. Price tapped the paper. Full market value for the mineral rights. No litigation. No eminent domain. Just a clean transaction. Rebecca snatched the document, scanning it. In exchange for what? Exclusive rights to the lithium deposit. Price said smoothly, and a commitment from Mr. Mendez to invest 20% back into Red Creek's infrastructure. Carlos's head snapped up. What? Price's smile widened. Jobs, Mr. Mendez. Schools. A real hospital. Your town dies without this. The trap was obvious. They'd cornered him. Take the money and look like a hero, or refuse and be the villain who doomed his hometown. Rebecca saw it too. She leaned in, and if we say no, Price's smile vanished. Then the state will have no choice but to reconsider Granite Ridge's eminent domain petition for the greater good. The unspoken threat hung in the air. Carlos stood abruptly, the chair screeching. I need to think. Price checked his watch. You have 48 hours. The desert at night was brutally quiet. Carlos sat on the shack's sagging porch, the governor's offer burning a hole in his pocket. $110 million. More money than 10 generations of Mendezes had ever seen. Headlights cut through the dark. A door slammed. Doris trudged up the path, carrying 2 thermoses. Figured you could use coffee that doesn't taste like motor oil. Carlos took the thermos, the heat seeping into his palms. You knew about the will this whole time. Doris settled beside him with a grunt. Tony gave it to me after Marco stole his truck. Said you'd need it someday. She sipped her coffee. Governor's people called the diner. Whole town's buzzing. Carlos exhaled. They want me to sell. Course they do. Doris spat into the dirt. Same bastards who let the mine poison our water in the 90s. Now they want to play heroes. The truth clicked into place. This wasn't about lithium. It was about control. Carlos pulled out his phone and dialed Rebecca. I know what we're doing. The press conference was standing room only. Reporters from Phoenix, Tucson, even a national cable news crew crammed into Red Creek's tiny town hall. Carlos adjusted the mic, his mouth dry. Behind him stood Rebecca, Doris, and, to everyone's shock, Senator Ramirez. Carlos unfolded a single sheet of paper. The state offered me $110 million, he began. The crowd gasped. But there's a catch. They want me to hand over the land, to trust them to do right by Red Creek. He looked up. We've heard that before. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. So here's my offer. Carlos nodded to Rebecca, who projected an image onto the wall. A blueprint. A community trust. The land stays mine, but the profits fund this. The image shifted to renderings. A solar farm. A vocational school. A medical clinic. Senator Ramirez stepped forward. The state will match every dollar invested, under the condition that Granite Ridge is barred from all operations. The mayor shot to his feet. This is outrageous. You can't. Oh, shut up, Pritchett. Doris snapped from the front row. The crowd laughed. Carlos gripped the podium. This isn't just about money. It's about who gets to decide what happens to our home. He turned to the cameras. The answer is us. The room erupted in applause. From the back, Marco watched silently, then turned and walked out. And in the shadows, Robert Vance's face twisted in rage as he dialed his phone. Rise of the underdog. The morning after the press conference, Red Creek woke to a spectacle it hadn't seen in decades, news vans lining Main Street. Satellite dishes pointed skyward like strange metal flowers. Carlos stood at the diner window, watching a reporter from Phoenix do a live stand-up in front of his ruined truck, now draped with a tarp bearing the spray-painted word mine like a badge of honor. Doris slid a plate of huevos rancheros across the counter. Eat. You look like hell. Carlos prodded the eggs, his appetite gone. Vance won't let this go. Course he won't. Doris jerked her chin toward the TV above the coffee machine, where a ticker at the bottom of the screen read, Granite Ridge shares plummet 14% amid corruption probe. You cost that bastard real money. The bell above the door jingled. Rebecca stormed in, her phone pressed her ear. No. Senator, we don't need another committee vote. She spotted Carlos and hung up. We got problems. Carlos pushed the plate away. How many? First, Rebecca said, stealing his coffee. Marco filed an emergency injunction to freeze all land deals pending his probate case. Carlos exhaled through his nose. Of course. Second, she continued, Vance just hired Leland Cross. Doris actually dropped her spatula. The Leland Cross? The bulldog who sued the Navajo Nation out of their water rights. Rebecca nodded grimly. Third, and you'll love this, the governor respectfully suggests delaying your community trust proposal until legal uncertainties are resolved. Carlos laughed bitterly. Translation, stall until I give up. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then did a double take. Or, until Vance finds another way to screw you. She turned the screen toward him. A real estate listing for the abandoned Red Creek High School annex, scheduled for auction that afternoon. Carlos frowned. Why does that matter? Because, Rebecca said slowly, it's zoned industrial, and it sits right between your land and the only highway access. The pieces clicked. If Vance owned that property, he could blockade Carlos's lithium shipments indefinitely. Carlos stood so fast the stool toppled over. What time's the auction? Rebecca checked her watch. 2 hours. The county clerk's office smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Carlos counted 12 Granite Ridge suits in the room before he even reached the sign-in sheet. At the front, Robert Vance held court with local officials, his laugh too loud, his handshake too firm. Leland Cross stood apart, a gaunt man in a three-piece wool suit despite the desert heat, his eyes like flint behind wire-rimmed glasses. He watched Carlos enter with the mild interest of a biologist observing a lab rat. Rebecca gripped Carlos's elbow. Don't engage. Just bid. The auctioneer wasted no time. Opening bid for parcel 1147. $50,000. Vance raised his paddle. 100,000. Carlos's stomach dropped. That was already double the assessed value. Rebecca nudged him. Do it. Carlos raised his hand. 110. Cross didn't even blink. 200. The room buzzed. Carlos's palms were slick. He'd scraped together $175,000 from his savings and loans from Doris and a few teachers. Nowhere near enough. 210, he choked out. Vance smirked. 300. Rebecca stepped forward. Your Honor, we request verification of funds. Cross slid a cashier's check across the clerk's desk. 500,000. In full. The auctioneer's gavel hit the desk. Sold. Vance clapped Cross on the back, then turned to Carlos. Looking forward to being neighbors, Mendez. The desert was merciless at high noon. Carlos kicked a rock, sending it skittering across the dead earth. We're screwed, without highway access. Not necessarily. Rebecca pulled a folded map from her briefcase. There's an old mining road here. Unofficial, but it connects to Route 87. Carlos studied the faded lines. That's through the res. Exactly. Rebecca grinned. Tribal land means state permits don't apply. And guess who just got a call from the Navajo Nation's legal team? Carlos stared at her. They hate Granite Ridge, she continued. Poison their groundwater in '08. They'll grant easement rights for a 10% stake in your solar farm. It was brilliant. Better than brilliant. It was justice. Carlos looked toward the horizon, where the annex's crumbling silhouette loomed. Vance thought he'd won. He had no idea what was coming. That night, Carlos returned to the shack one last time. The wind whistled through the cracks, carrying ghosts of memories. Uncle Tony humming off-key rancheras, the smell of burnt coffee, the weight of the old man's hand on his shoulder. He knelt by the stove, prying up a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay a tobacco tin, its lid rusted shut. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a Colt .45 and a note. For when they come, T. Carlos sank back on his heels. He wasn't that kind of man. But as headlights crested the distant ridge, too fast, too purposeful, he understood. Some battles couldn't be won in court. He pocketed the gun just as tires crunched to a halt outside. A door slammed. Then another. Carlos stepped onto the porch, squinting against the blinding high beams. Marco. The silhouette that emerged wasn't his brother. Robert Vance stood framed in the light, a tire iron dangling from one hand. Behind him, two hulking figures spread out, blocking the exits. Evening Mendez. Vance said, "Let's talk." New purpose. The tire iron glinted in the moonlight as Vance took a step forward, his shadow stretching long and grotesque across the desert sand. Carlos didn't move. He kept his hands loose at his sides, his fingers inches from where the Colt weighed heavy in his pocket. "Funny place to hide out," Vance said, his voice slick with false amusement. "Then again, guess you don't have many friends left." Carlos kept his eyes on the two men flanking Vance. Bruisers in Granite Ridge polos, their arms thick with muscle and bad intentions. "What do you want?" Vance smirked. "Same thing I've always wanted. Your land, your lithium, your future." He tapped the tire iron against his palm. "Only now, I'm not offering money." One of the men cracked his knuckles. The other pulled a switchblade, the blade catching the light with a cruel flicker. Carlos's pulse roared in his ears. He'd spent his life avoiding fights, swallowing insults, walking away. But this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Uncle Tony's legacy, about Red Creek, about every person like him who'd ever been pushed down and told to stay there. He let his fingers brush the Colt's grip. "You really think this ends with me?" Vance's smirk faltered. "It ends tonight." A coyote howled in the distance, the sound rising into the vast, indifferent sky. Then, headlights, a roar of an engine. A battered pickup truck came tearing through the scrub, kicking up dust like a storm. It skidded to a halt between Carlos and Vance, the door flying open before it fully stopped. Marco. He stumbled out, drunk but steady, a shotgun clutched in his hands. Vance's men froze. "Back off," Marco slurred, leveling the barrel at Vance's chest. "He's my brother." The desert held its breath. Carlos stared at Marco, really looked at him for the first time in years. The same crooked nose from when they were kids, and Marco took a baseball to the face, defending him. The same stubborn set to his jaw. Vance laughed, but it was thin. "This your play, Marco? After everything?" Marco spat in the dirt. Only one thing worse than a Mendez who quits. He thumbed the shotgun safety off. "And that's an outsider who thinks he can take what's ours." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Vance raised his hands, slow and theatrical. "Fine. Have your little moment." He nodded to his men, backing toward the cars. "But this isn't over." The engine growled to life. Tires spun. And just like that, they were gone, swallowed by the night. Marco lowered the shotgun, his shoulders sagging. Carlos exhaled. "Why?" Marco wouldn't meet his eyes. Found out Vance paid off the probate judge. He kicked at a rock. "And Uncle Tony left me something, too." He pulled a faded photograph from his pocket. Two boys on a desert hill, arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning into the sun. Carlos remembered that day. They'd been hunting for scorpions. Marco had carried him home when he twisted his ankle. Marco's voice was rough. I forgot who we were. The weight in Carlos's chest shifted, not gone, but different. Morning came hard and bright. Carlos stood outside the newly christened Mendez-Lopez Community Center, formerly the Shack, where a crew of Navajo solar engineers and Red Creek volunteers swarmed over the roof, installing panels. Rebecca handed him a coffee. Tribal Council approved the easement. First shipments roll out next week. Carlos watched a group of high school kids, the same ones who once mocked him, helping unload supplies under Doris's direction. Vance, facing indictment. And thanks to Marco's testimony, so is the probate judge. She smirked. Turns out threatening a man's family makes him chatty. Carlos sipped his coffee. It was bitter. Good. Marco appeared, lugging a crate of tools. His hands were blistered, his shirt soaked with sweat. He didn't speak, just nodded at Carlos before disappearing inside. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. You sure about this? Letting him work here. Carlos thought of the photograph, of the tire iron in Vance's hand, of the way Marco had stood between him and the dark. Everyone deserves a second chance, he said. That night, Carlos climbed the hill behind the center, the same one from the photograph. The desert stretched endlessly under the stars, alive with a hum of cicadas and the distant laughter from the construction crew's campfire. He knelt, pressing his palm to the warm earth. Somewhere beneath him, lithium waited. The future. But here, now, with the lights of the center glowing below and the ghosts of the past finally quiet, it was enough. Carlos Mendez, janitor, fighter, heir to a broken legacy. Breathed in deep and let it out slow. The land, at last, was his, and he would make it mean something. Legacy. 5 years later. Carlos Mendez stood on the rooftop of the Mendez-Lopez Renewable Energy Center, watching the sunrise paint the desert in shades of amber and gold. Below him, the once crumbling shack had transformed into a sprawling complex. Solar panels gleaming like a second sunrise, the vocational school buzzing with students, and the medical clinic's doors already open for the day's first patients. A cool breeze carried the scent of creosote and fresh coffee from the cafeteria. Carlos inhaled deeply, the weight of the past years settling into his bones not as a burden, but as proof. Mr. Mendez? A teenager, Lena, one of the first scholarship recipients, stood behind him, clutching a tablet. The tribal council's online, too. They want to discuss the wind farm proposal. Carlos smiled. Tell them I'll call back after the ceremony. Lena hesitated, then blurted, Is it true that this place was really just a broken-down shack when you started? Carlos glanced at the memorial plaque near the entrance, in memory of Antonio Tony Mendez, who saw the future in the sand. Even more broken than you believe, he said. The auditorium was packed. Families from Red Creek sat beside Navajo elders and solar engineers from Phoenix. Reporters lined the back wall. And in the front row, Marco sat stiff in a suit, his hands clasped tightly. Sober now, his construction company having rebuilt half the town. Carlos stepped to the podium. The room quieted. 5 years ago, he began, I was a janitor with a mop and a mountain of doubt. I had no idea what to do with the land my uncle left me, only that it mattered. He nodded toward the window, where the desert stretched beyond the glass. Turns out, it wasn't about the lithium. It was about the people. He gestured to the crowd, to Doris, now the center's operations manager, to Rebecca, sipping coffee in the corner, her legal firm having taken down 3 more mining giants, to the student in the back, their futures rewritten by scholarships. This was never my story, Carlos said. It was always ours. A hand shot up, a young boy from the vocational school. What's next? Carlos grinned. Next, we light up the whole damn state. The applause shook the walls. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Marco lingered by the memorial plaque. Carlos joined him, the silence between them comfortable now. You did good, Hermano, Marco muttered. Carlos bumped his shoulder. We did. Marco's laugh was rough but real. Yeah, Yeah, we did. Together, they walked into the sunlight. This story proves that fortune favors the resilient. If Carlos's journey inspired you, hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life underdog stories, and tell us in the comments, what would you fight for? See you in the next video.